table here, Commissioner Lindsay Rickmeyer. In this area, Commissioner Daryl Folkford.
Yep.
Paul Brown, I introduced myself. Cody Ferguson is not here tonight, is that correct? We don't want to miss him.
Cody could not.
Cody's, okay, just want to make sure that I don't miss him. Danny Sparks. Department of Commerce. Beth Byron, Department of Commerce. Amy Erbacher, I'm sorry. Yep, you're good. With WGM Group, she'll be leading our presentation tonight. Caitlin Frisbee. Ryan Saltis is, he's going to be working with this project. He also could not be here tonight. Kyle Mace is a water rights specialist with WGM Group. Happy to have you. And Kurt Zeiler with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. We're happy to have you as well. So with that, Commissioner Fulford would like to make a statement, so I'll turn it over to him.
Make a statement.
Make a statement.
And first I'll say thanks for everybody for coming. We've been kind of waiting for this opportunity to talk about water for a long time, so thanks. And
Kyle.
Kyle, for coming down. They could be with their families tonight, but they chose to be with us, so we be respectful to him. You just carry on and see how the night goes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we're gonna jump in and get started. Again, Jamie Erbacher with WGM Group. And so as part of this, actually, the focus of this project is really to help Broadwater County plan for the future. What's your growth going to look like in 20 years? Where do you want to see that happen? Where don't you want to see that happen? And so in front of you tonight, you're going to see maps on the table. I'm going to go over those in just a moment, but know that we want your input and we want you to put that input right on these maps so that we can take it back. That helps us develop the plan for you. So we've done a series of meetings so far. We do have 2 more meetings coming up that we are going to do as public outreach. The next one is going to be November 14th. This is really for the focus more on the northern end of the county, and that will be at the Flynn building at 6 p.m. And at that meeting, we are going to really start digging in and looking at the land use designations that we have put on the maps. So the feedback that we have received from you, we are going to actually map those and then go over that with the community. And then following that, we are going to come back to the Bridger Brewing on December 6th and do the same thing. Again, go over the land use designations that we're proposing for these maps. And it's a great time for you to tell us, yes, this makes sense. No, this makes sense, because maybe there's some steep slopes or some really great agricultural soils that we missed. So again, really needing feedback from the community on that. If you have friends in the area, please tell them to come, because it is going to be important. The growth policy, it is a recommending and a guiding document. It is not regulatory. And that is something always to keep in mind, but it is something that the commissioners, it is something that staff, it's something that community, that your realtors, that they can use to see where growth is anticipated and at what densities that might be, or what uses that might be. You know, is it really anticipated for commercial development, or is it anticipated for residential high density, or should it be agricultural lands, or is it state-owned land that is not likely to be developed? And so is that more of an open space designation? All right, so I'm gonna we are actually contracted through CTAP to do this work. And so I know that Gus Byram and Danny Arps would like to do just a little quick, couple quick words, if you will. There we go. And so Gus and Danny, I'll turn it over to you real quick, and then I'll jump into the land use maps and what we have going here.
So, my quick introduction again, I've met some of you, very pleased. I think this is my 3rd meeting down here. But again, I'm Gus Byram with the Montana Department of Commerce. We work on one program called Community Technical Assistance Program, and our job is community building. So Danny and I work every day, especially with an emphasis on helping communities plan their future growth and development. So we are very involved in trying to help communities, give them the tools. Our job is not to tell you what to do. but to give you the tools to try to get towards the future that you folks want to see. And we do a lot of guiding in terms of infrastructure programs because we are involved in a lot of federal and state infrastructure funding programs, especially for water, central water, and wastewater systems. So we're going to talk about water tonight. We're also involved in affordable housing programs and in economic development programs in job creation. So, and at the request of the Broadwater County Commissioners, we have been involved now in this effort, trying to help you folks, bringing in our consultant here with WGM and with Jamie and Peggy to provide your expertise and giving you folks the information in terms of what kind of future do you want to see. Because there's no question that you are in a high growth area. You know, everyone loves Montana. We've been discovered, we know that now. And what kind of future communities and growth and development do we want to see going forward? So that's why we are here. Danny, you want anything to do that?
Yeah, that's kind of covered it, but essentially what we would like to do for you folks is just give you some tools, give you some education so that you guys can get together and make some plans, make them tangible, and then goals moving out of this. Like Jamie had said, that the land use plan, not just help guide a lot of decisions that happen, even at a small scale moving forward, but to keep everybody kind of cohesive and on the same page. What we don't want to see is you guys just get overrun with growth and have no idea how to deal with it. And then all you're doing is reacting to it. And that's the opposite. But our plan is to help you guys look to the future and really determine what you want to see your county and your area look like, your community. There's a lot of people, some of these maps you guys can see. One of them we had one of our guys at Commerce named Dave. He's a total wizard with maps. He zoomed out and did a little bit larger area, not just southern Broadwater County, but the adjoining areas to Manhattan to Three Forks. And you can see that this growth coming out of Bozeman is kind of going everywhere. And so there's enough people in this area, it would be a good sized town in Montana. So to get everybody kind of thinking about where you want to see things happen, where your restrictions are as far as land use, with floodplain or with water availability, all these different factors come into place. They're all something to think about. Jamie's going to help you guys kind of organize those thoughts so that moving forward you can actually have an actual plan that is something everybody at least wants to see. And sometimes this is it's a lot to bite off. So if you want to think about what you don't want to see and where you don't want to see it, that might be a little bit easier to start with. But as the meeting goes on, if things come to your mind, write them on the map, and then we can bring them up later and discuss them. But just so you don't forget those thoughts, and we're covering a lot of stuff tonight. But if you're having ideas or questions about an area, write on the maps, because we take those maps back and then all that data gets put into a bigger map later to be used for everybody to see. So go ahead and draw all over them, put sticky notes on them, cross things out, scribble on them, do whatever you need to. That's what they're for tonight. I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your schedules to do this too. It is important.
Thanks, Danny. And the maps that Danny had mentioned, they are in the back here. So if you need to, feel free to get up during the meeting, after the meeting, and take a look at those as well. So before I run through a couple different scenarios about potential ways to preserve land and then also talk about the maps on the table, there was interest in knowing about, figure out how to close this down, just a moment. Interest in, hey, Caitlin, I might need your help.
Yep.
Interest in knowing more about the soils in the area and how to find that information out. So on the agenda, we have included a link to the NRCS website for the Web Soil Service. Sorry. And so that's what this is here. I'm just going to do a really quick tutorial, but it's a great source and you can jump on at home and play around with it. This is on the agenda, correct? So you click on the green button there. So you can go in and you can search for an area. or easier. Sorry, I'm working a little backwards here. That's good. Okay, there we go. Okay, so zooming in on the area that we want to see. And then next, what you would do is you would go in and you would draw a polygon around the area of interest. This could be an area that's more specific to your property itself. It could be a larger region. I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna select this general area. Oop. Of course, let me get a little closer.
Jamie, is that about where we are now?
I believe,
Oh,
yeah, a little bit north. Let's go with this here.
If you just double click the third,
The third one,
double click that.
cool, thank you. Okay, so then it defines this area and it will shade it for you. And then from here, if you go to this soils map tab, it creates sorry, it's really hard to see over here. It creates the different soil types and it classifies them by group. And from here on the left-hand side, this gives you those groupings. Okay, and you can click on these and it'll tell you about them. You can also go, my cursor, and you can download your soils data. You can add this to your shopping cart. It is a free service. So if we click on add to shopping cart, you click OK. Then you can go to your shopping cart and you can actually download this data and it will provide the map as well as an explanation of those soil types. Okay. And you just go over here to checkout. And if you do get it now, it downloads it straight to your computer. Okay. So I know that's pretty quick, but we have a lot to cover. Oops. Yeah, good. Okay. I was like, that's awesome. So I know that was really quick. If you have questions, feel free to call me at the office and I can walk you through it again too. But we do have a lot to cover tonight, so not going to go into it too much more than that. But just know that it is there for a resource for you. Okay. So next, I just want to go through a couple different options. We presented these at the North meeting, and it really seemed to resonate with the community up there. And so I thought it was might be interesting for you all to see down here as well. And so this really focused on placing density in the right place, but also preserving your agricultural lands. So this first development here, these are both examples within Missoula County. That's where I live and that's where I do a decent amount of my work as well. But this here is a 10-acre parcel on the left-hand side. And as part of this, we did it actually consists of two parcels. The parcels currently run north-south. And so As part of this project, we did a boundary line relocation, and we were able to separate off these prime egg soils, as well as some floodplain area and riparian resource area. So we had a lot of natural features that we felt that we wanted to preserve with this project. And so we actually are working with Trust Montana, and Trust Montana will ultimately buy this northern parcel here. And it's currently farmed by Clark Fork Organics. And so as Trust Montana works with this property owner and acquires the property, they will do a long-term lease to a future farmer. That long-term lease will be for 75 years. It can be renewed. It can be allocated to a different farmer or multiple farmers if the case is necessary. And then on the southern piece of the property, this here is an area that we determined were not good soils. And they actually show us all good soils if you go to the NRCS website. But because Clark Fork Organics has farmed this property for 40 some years, they know that the soils are not great down here. They're rocky and they're not productive. And so they said, what can we do down here instead? And so we actually worked with the city and the county. They are going to get contract sewer and water. So it's a little bit different than your situation here, but they're going to get contract sewer and water through the city, remain in the county. And then they're going to be able to develop these 12 homes. And there's also a farm store component in the lower left-hand corner here. So it's going to be a farm store and cafe. And the product that comes off of the farm, a good portion of that is going to be served in this farm store and cafe. The farmer is actually going to run this stand or store, excuse me. So again, just kind of a unique property of ways that you don't have to choose between housing and conserving farmland. You can do both. It just takes some drive and some initiative from the landowner themselves. The pictures on the right hand of the screen, this is just some views, conceptual, of course, of what the development might look like as the homes are built out. So again, just some way to show you that you don't have to choose. Again, that farmland, it can have housing. And as we are preparing the land use plan for you all, you may have a agricultural district that is one home per 40 acres to one home per 160 acres, for example. But we know that you might want some flexibility there. And so you can get some additional density if you do some sort of cluster and conservation design that would be similar to this. Maybe you need a place for your ranch hands to work or to live, excuse me. And so by providing housing on site for them on your soils that aren't as productive would be a great opportunity for you. This next slide, this is a master plan subdivision that we're currently working on right now. And this is going to be taken in phases, if you will. So right now we are currently working in the northeast corner on this portion of the development. And that is going to consist of 4 separate phases of the subdivision. And then this here will be left as a larger remainder that we will develop in the future. And the reason that we're doing it this way is, one, because of water rights and the availability of sewer and water. So we have some water rights that could be associated with this property, but we don't have everything that we need at this point. And so we're going to bite it off in chunks and take it through that way. This is a pretty unique agri-hood development. Again, this has in the center of the development some farmland. I think it is 40 some acres, if I remember correctly, that is going to be used by future farmers. It can allow some of the 4-H community within Missoula to come out and work those lands to learn about farming and potentially maybe have some animals out there and locations for animals out there as well. So again, just another example of how you can still preserve farmland, but also have some housing with it. This slide here, this is the land use designation table that we have put together so far for your community. We have a number of different land use designations, a general description, and then an intensity that would go with those. And I'll show you in a couple different slides about how we conceptualize what your land use designations may look like on the larger scale of the map. But in general, you have everything from essentially public lands that would be open and resource and recreation, your larger scale working lands, an agricultural designation, a rural residential. So that's going to be your larger tracts of land, 10 to 40 acres, but would still allow housing on them. All the way down to a residential designation that would allow housing between 1 unit per acre and 1 unit per 2 acres. We also have a designation called planned neighborhood, and this could allow for your more dense developments, residential, but allowing some small scale commercial as well. And this could be roughly at 8 dwelling units per acre or greater. Again, allowing for some small scale commercial. And again, we call it planned neighborhood because we know that sewer and water isn't available in the county right now. And so you're going to have a plan before you can actually build to that density. Commercial and town center, again, recognizing that you have some fairly decent size census designated communities out here, and knowing that within those areas, you should probably have some commercial services so that you don't have to travel as far to get to meet your needs and reduce some of those vehicle miles traveled. Civic and employment centers, more for your public use, your government-owned property, county, state lands, things of that nature. And then your industrial center. You have an existing tax increment financing district down here in the southern end of Broadwater County. We would designate that definitely industrial center. But we want to know from the rest of you, are there other areas where we should be designating as industrial? Do we foresee an industrial use coming in that we're not aware of? This is where we need your feedback on these maps to tell us what's happening in your community and what you want to see in your community. So I've just picked the general location of where we are now. The parcel in green here, this is the Bridger Brewing property. And also the tax increment financing district is the area in green. So again, that's where we would designate that as industrial. And then just some other examples of future land use designations that we see for this area of the town. We know that we have an existing developed residential neighborhood here. Adjacent is currently vacant land, but that could be a planned neighborhood at that 8 dwelling units per acre or greater. We had some large scale ag lands over on the east side, and there's some constraints with regards to waterways that currently bisect some of these properties. Others are currently used as agriculture, so we felt that would be appropriate. Don't mind the text here. This is an example from another project, but if we were to designate the properties as open and resource and recreation, again, this is going to be your federally owned lands, BLM lands. This is what the map for the southern end of the county could look like just for that designation. And then we would have a map like this for every other designation as well. And then once you overlay all those, it would be populated with a bunch of colors. So with that, after and during, actually during and after the presentation from Kyle and from Kurt, please go through and make notes on these maps on the table. Use the markers, use your pens, use the sticky notes as Danny asked, and tell us what you want to see in your community and what you don't want to see. If that's easier, that you don't want to see development, circle it. Make note of that. Let us know. Okay. Got a need for services? Tell us where you want another fire station, where you need another police station. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it over. And Kyle, are you up first, I think?
Gotta wait.
Wait, hold on 1 sec. Sorry. Which one do you want to get at?
Sweet. Close. We're close. Slideshow. There we go. Okay.
All right. The reason they're all here, right? Well, that's what they told me anyway. So my name's Kyle Mace. I work for WGM Group and I work in water rights. That's not all science and it's not all art. It's something in between. It's a lot of law and it's a lot of science as well. But DNRC is the agency the state agency that deals with water rights. They were able to come. So I was asked to come and talk about what I know. So my experiences are in the private sector and I worked at DNRC over 10 years ago, but I know a little bit about what goes on and how they handle it. But I work with it every day. Water rights are complicated and they're tied to the land and they're tied to tradition and history. So it gets very serious very quickly and there's a lot of time and money involved and a lot of heartache. So it's important, but what we're going to talk about today is kind of like the 101, what are water rights really? So I guess that's sort of our agenda, but mainly in water rights, there's old existing water rights, there's new water rights, which take a long time to acquire on a large scale. And there's a subset of new water rights that are exempt wells, exempt water rights. Probably a lot of the houses around here have their own wells and they've got exempt well. That exempt word gets thrown around a lot, but it means it's exempt from permitting. So it's a very limited situation. There's not a lot of review. There's also some limited legal protections because it's an exception to the permitting rules. So I've been doing it for about 13 years. I don't know everything and I learn something new every day, but any questions along the way, let me know. Catch me afterwards if I'm not making sense.
Is this
This one I
working?
just put in all my presentations.
Is this working or?
Yes,
Okay,
it's working.
okay.
Just point at
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
This is on one of those postcards in gas stations. Tourist traps and everybody loves it. It's not wrong. Like I said, these guys make their living with water. We all need water. We gotta have it. These guys are discussing it. We're discussing it today. But we don't have any weapons. Shovels.
Shovels.
Can be a weapon. A water right is the right to use water from a certain source for a certain purpose. So these are examples of beneficial use of the water. You can't use water for more than one use unless your water right allows it. The most common ones in the state are irrigation and livestock, and they go hand in hand usually. And that's typically what you have to work with in watertight areas like this, which I'll talk about. You're limited to finding water rights that are out there on the land, and those are usually irrigation and livestock uses. Irrigation uses are seasonal, but people need water year round. So how do we vary the two there? And there's a lot of challenges. Fish and wildlife uses, domestic, commercial. These guys use water for commercial uses because they're taking water and turning it into beer. So there's any number of uses, and there's a lot of others out there. Sorry.
You mentioned that you make it sound like the rights are gone. If there's no water to be found, somebody has already possessed all of the rights of the land area. And what's left is negotiating the use of those rights for your different groups. Did I get that right?
Yep, but you're jumping ahead.
Sure.
Your interpretation is essentially, you're describing the conundrum as much of this. I'll get to it, but this is a closed basin. You can't go get a new water right unless you retire an existing use. And there's some nuances there. And that exception is that exempt well exception. And that's why so many people use it across the state. As many times it's your only option. And it's not a great option for everyone. It's many times practically the only option. I said earlier, it's tied to the land. So when you sell land and you've got water rights on it, water rights go with it. So it's property right tied to the land. Unless you specifically reserve it. We don't need to get into that. There's a use it or lose it aspect to water rights in Western water law. You don't use it for 10 years. there's a presumption of abandonment and you might be forced to defend it if you go resume the water use. All kinds of things that happen can start by.
But real quick, I mean, there's instances where people sell the water right. How's that thing done? You said it's tied to the land.
It's tied to the land until you sever it in a legal deed.
Okay,
So if you sell
okay.
If you sell your property, you can say no water rights go with it. Or you can grant them some of the water rights.
Gotcha.
You can then take that deed, a lot of times people quit claim it to another entity. Sell it to someone. They might buy it for a lot of money, but they can't use it until they get permission from DNRC to use it somewhere else. And that process, which I'll talk about, is very difficult.
Thank you for that.
Yep. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so if you know anything about water rights, you might have, or if you own any, you might have one of these. It's a summary of the water rights. It's an abstract of the water rights. And there's a website, I should put it on there, but DNRC has a water rights query system. You can look by name, geocode, lots of different ways, and you're gonna find water rights. It's gonna tell you who the owner is. I'm picking on the city of Laurel because I was raised there. I feel like I earned the right to pick on them. This is what a municipal water right is. So we've got ownership, we've got priority date, which is the date it was first put to use. We've got municipal use for the purpose. We've got a flow rate and a volume. So that's the amount of water you can take. The volume is your annual volume all year long. There's the source. It's coming from the Yellowstone River. Point of diversion. This is the only place they're allowed to pump that water. This legal description. You have to ask, I'll talk about it later, but you have to ask DNRC for permission to move any of those things. Move to a new idea or a new pump. You got a year-round period of use. If this was an irrigation right, it would be seasonal, April through October, for example. And then your place of use. This is the only places that it's allowed to be used. A lot of times, especially since cities and towns, it's being used elsewhere because fish are growing and they haven't kept up with their water rights to fix that. I think that's about it for abstracts, but all water rights are embodied in abstract. Lots of exempt wells out there. I'll mention it later, but if the landowner didn't go and file for a water right, there may not be an abstract for it. There may not be a water right because it's up to the landowner to file. So I'll talk about that later. Yeah. Haven't seen that yet.
Oh, I just did it.
Oh.
Well, no.
Find out what other slide.
Okay, just that one slide. We'll go forward. There you go.
Okay, so water rights are in the 1972 Constitution. The Constitution recognized all existing water rights. Most of those irrigation rights predate 1972. They weren't really in the Constitution before. So it recognized the existing rights. It defines all water within the state boundaries, even that of the atmosphere, as the property of the state for the use of its people. And that license to use the water is really through those water rights. And as long as you're complying with the use it or lose it and sticking with the rules, you don't lose it. It stays with the land. And then it provides that DNRC really is the clearinghouse, the administration and record keeping for all water rights in the state. So that right after the Constitution, the 1973 Water Use Act further detailed how water rights are administered. The water court in Bozeman adjudicates all existing water rights, all those old water rights that were there before the Constitution. And then all water uses after June 30th, 73 are administered by the DNRC in that what was then a new system, the permit and change authorization process.
That's just the opener slide. There we go.
Like we got potential to move. Got the old city of Townsend still fighting the issues.
I'll talk about it, but they're just starting adjudication. Again,
Is there a period of time where you can actually sit back and breathe easy?
let's say it's done.
more or less, yeah.
Yes, and that's called a final decree. There are about 10, so there's 85 basins in the state. Roughly 10 that are in final decree. And 9 or 10 of those all happened in the last 2 years. The current water court judge, McLeay, is flying through it. We're all just trying to keep up. But yes, so the water court is supposed to work itself out of the job. That's the goal. I'll talk about it more here. So adjudication is really to take existing water rights, all the old uses out there that were 100 years prior to the Constitution. So we said, what do we have? We put them on paper because they weren't really in one place before. They were in different counties. It was all county based. They were on pieces of paper handed down in the family. They weren't recorded, so people didn't really know what was what. It was all just really drainage specific. So, and why do we want to put this on paper and adjudicate it? Well, we're a headwater state. And we've got downstream states that also use water. So the thinking there is we need to get our house in order so that we can protect and defend the water use that happens in the state. That's the really big picture. We do have streams that cross different, like Yellowstone is 3 different states, and Wyoming and Montana fight over Yellowstone is a big one of water. So that's really the reason to do it. The Water Use Act set up that claim filing period so that old water uses could all come in and claim it. Between 79 and 82, they said, come in and claim your water rights, put them on here. Claim the kitchen sink, we'll figure it out later. We'll adjudicate it, we'll get there in a few years. My entire life it's been going on, almost 43. There's 85 basins, they go basin by basin across the state.
So there are 85 basins and they've only completed 10,
In final decree.
10 or in.
But
decree.
they have preliminary decree, which, for example, the Jefferson has a preliminary decree, the Madison has one. And I mean, we're right on 4 basins right here, and they've all been in recent decrees. So that preliminary decree comes out and they work through all the issues and all the objections. And ideally, there's nothing left between that and the final decree, except that there's federal entities that have compacts and they have to kind of iron out those compacts. That's the main thing that happens between those 2 decrees. So really the bulk of the work happens in the preliminary decree. So when we file claims, when Farmer Joe goes and files a claim, he says, I'm irrigating 100 acres from this source and here's my map. And turns out he's actually irrigating 200 or he's irrigating 50. And those are the types of things that the NRC tries to figure out through aerial photo interpretation. Or when they go and decree it, then the neighbors go and look and say, he's not irrigating 200 acres, or he's claiming the wrong priority date. Mine's earlier than his, and then they object to each other, and usually it resolves. It can go down the line to a hearing, but that's what adjudication is for, is to get the paper to match what's happening on the ground. And that's still going on. I can't remember if I have what my next slide is. That's part of the issue.
Decree.
Okay. So after claims are examined by the state, they send it all, a big stack of paper, said, here's all the water rights in the basin. The water court issues a decree and it starts an objection period. So, for example, the Madison Basin came out last year, the 6-month objection period where everyone looks at each other's water rights. File an objection, guess what? Now he gets to file a counter objection, and then it goes into a case and you kind of resolve it over the course of roughly 3 to 5 years is kind of the timeline. The Jefferson is wrapping up in its very last cases now, as far as I'm aware, and that's about 4 years, I think. Which relatively isn't bad considering it's been going on for 43 years. Okay,
Kyle, where do you go to find that information, the objections, like, or what's been,
so either the DNRC adjudication website has all the decrees.
okay,
You search DNRC adjudication. All the notices are on there, and then the water court has a pretty good website with all that on there too. Pretty much said all this.
Mhm. Cool.
Okay, so here's the 85 basins. This is an April map, but it's just showing all the statuses. So final decree is these orange ones. We've got Powder River, some in the northeast, not very many. And here we are, right around here. At this point where 4 basins come together.
Whoa.
Technically, we're in the Jefferson Basin here until Trident. Trident is the line where a new basin starts and it goes all the way down through Walter Lake. In a minute here, when we're talking about water rights, there's a legal and physical availability component. And that's what makes this location tricky, because if you drilled, let's say, we had a community system and it was a deep well, we have to figure out what that well is depleting. That well can be depleted as further. And then we're talking about impacting water rights in the Madison Basin, and maybe in the Jefferson, and maybe in the next basin. So it has had this location has some complications to it when you're talking about really deep water systems, community water systems. Maybe Kurt might talk about some of that. Yeah, 85 basins, they're all in a different place. But a lot of them are kind of the same color, which means they're all getting pushed along at a similar rate, which is good. Okay. So after that final decree, or even after the preliminary decree, if people argue about water and there's complaints and we need to figure out how to administer the water, really it's the district courts that have jurisdiction over it. So water users in one area can ask the district court, petition the district court for a commissioner, which then they all pay to kind of control each other's water use, and then people aren't fighting about it anymore. But between the district court and the water courts, things kind of go back and forth. Some district court judges don't want to deal with it, so the water court judges will deal with some of the water use issues. We don't know what it looks like in the future because they're currently discussing and trying to figure out what the water court is going to do after decrees. Do they need to stick around? Do we need to have a different type of water judge system? So it's all kind of in the legislature in the last session and in the next one. Okay, so we talked about old water use, and that's important because it impacts new water use in basins like this. Here's your exemption, your exception to the permitting requirements. So we'll save that for now, but you either go get a beneficial water use permit or you change one of those old water rights. So if we're doing a community system right here that serves a large area, you have to get a permit. That becomes a water right permit. They call it beneficial use permit. That's for anything larger than this. So 35 gallons a minute and 10 acre feet is what the exempt use is. So if we've got a couple hundred gallons a minute from multiple wells and we're serving a large area, you have to hire someone like Kurt from the private sector to do groundwater studies, figure out where your area of depletion is, figure out who you're going to impact legally and physically. You're going to have to drill multiple wells, do all that pump testing. And then, because this is a closed basin, you almost have to hit pause and figure out how you're going to offset that new use. Are you going to buy water, some of those old water rights? Are you going to get maybe VOR contract water? There's a few things that I'll mention, but there's not a ton of ready-made options. There's no turnkey solution, no water bank. There are some areas where ditch companies, there's one in Missoula that changed half of their the land that is now developed. They changed it to what they call marketing for mitigation. So they have a special set of shares that they're able to sell because they're not irrigating that land anymore, but they still have the water rights for it. So they're able to sell that to offset new use. And that keeps money in the ditch company to keep operating on the ag lands that are still there. So we're hopeful that that'll happen more in the state, but it takes a lot of organization. And usually it means a ditch company, irrigation district, large, maybe a big group of private irrigators can get together and do it, but it takes a lot of organization. I have this here, but some cities and towns have what they call water reservations, which were granted as like a set aside block. Three Forks might have something like that. There's not something in an unincorporated area like that. It was from the seventies, so it had to be the city or town basically in the seventies. Okay. So exempt wells, there's a lot of them around here. They're less than 35 gallons a minute, and less than 10 acres. 10 acres or 1 acre foot. I think
Mm.
we put it in there wrong, but 1 acre foot is 325,000 gallons of water. So 10 acre feet is 3.2 million. That's plenty of water for houses, but it goes quickly for irrigation. So PNRC standards say you can irrigate 4 to 5 acres from 10 acres. So if you've got large lots and subdivisions that exist already, and there's a lot of lawns, people are using a lot of water in the houses. They're not using it much. My house with 3 kids and my wife and my little flower beds and stuff is about a third of an acre foot or less. So in-house uses, let's say a subdivision came in next door, they could fit 30 to 35 houses, small houses on 10 acre feet if there was 0 irrigation. So that's the maximum you can do with these exempt water rights. Yes.
So, right, so let's say in a residential development in a house, if I use 10,000 gallons a month, that's 220,000 a year, right?
10,000 gallons a month?
Yeah.
100.
Yeah, pardon, two outlets.
You were talking about two.
Yeah, but anyway, but way below the 325.
Yeah, a third, about a third of an acre.
Yeah.
Which the minimum they'll allow is 0.28, so it's pretty much accurate. I think a lot of people in-house usage is about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there a limitation on the number of wells that can be drilled against that 10 acre feet per year block?
No.
I can drill 1,035 gallon per minute wells as long as I don't exceed that 225,000 gallons a year.
From a water perspective, yes. Well, it's 10 acre, it's 10 times that. So what this is missing is 1 acre foot equal.
Oh, I see.
325. So it's 3.2 million. There's not a limitation on the number of wells, but you're gonna run out of space and they're gonna impact each other. And there's septic setbacks, there's lot line setbacks, utility
So
setbacks.
this isn't as simple as a developer coming in and saying, I'm gonna build 40
No.
houses on 20 acres. And I'm gonna put them all inside that. It's not that simple.
No, in fact, they'd be limited, anyone would be limited to about 35 under this
About 35.
exemption. 35 is roughly
35 wells.
houses.
Okay.
They could put any number of wells, but what I'm saying is they've got other physical limitations to drill that and will plus the cost. But yeah, if you manifold any wells, any of those, let's say you have a 5 acre lot, and you have 3 wells and they're all manifolded together, your limit is 10 acres. Okay. Once you pipe them together, they become a combined appropriation and you're now limited to those rules. There's some exceptions to it. So if you've got a subdivision out here that, let's say they platted it in 2008, the recession hit and it idled, and there's 100 lots that aren't built. That's a pre-2014 parcel of land, and it's based on a district court case. But if you got an old preliminary plat, each one of those lots can have 10 acres. That's a big difference from today. If you walk in and say, I'm gonna carve this up and do subdivision. You can't get that. You're limited 10 acre feet for any new subdivision, any new project. Unless you go get a permit, which has its other issues. But those old ones, which they're building out, so they're disappearing. There's not that many left. I don't know the numbers, maybe there are, but if you've got an old preliminary plat that predates 2014, you can get more exempt.
And Kyle, just for clarification, those lots do not have to be filed prior to 2014. They just have to have preliminary.
Preliminary plat approval.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, go back a second.
Yep, sorry.
So, and something important with exempt wells, anyone can go do it. So if you hit all of your lots, my lot in town, I can go drill and get that. Once the well driller files their well log with Bureau of Mines and Geology, I take that and I go file for a groundwater certificate with the NRC. So it's up to the landowner to do it. And that presents some issues with, say, if you're fighting against a subdivision next door or a neighbor's well is impacting yours. Well, one, do you have a water right? Did your predecessor get one? You can go get one today, but you need to have that piece of paper to defend your own use and figure out, maybe the neighbor did file. There's no real enforcement of it. Under law, they're supposed to file for it after they put it to use. Drill the well, file for it afterwards.
So this is an exception to permitting. I still have to have a legal claim to the right. I live in Townsend.
Yeah.
I can't just simply go into my backyard and sink a well. I have to be able to show that I have a right against which the well can be drilled.
You can drill the well, but then you go file a notification to get your piece of paper, your groundwater certificate
But where do I get the right from to do that?
from DNRC. You file with DNRC.
That's messy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's what people are using, like I said earlier, because that's about all there is. This is a conundrum that this legislature talks about every single session. Maybe they don't talk about so much during the last one or the next one, but it's always there in the background. And there's not an easy solution to it. The ERC, right now, they're trying to update and improve the permit and change process. But it's not gonna solve the real issues, which are, there's no legal availability in a lot of these places to go get a water right for a central system, for good central water use instead of poking holes everywhere. Right now, we're in a situation where if your neighbor drills a well, really it's cheaper and easier, instead of paying lawyers and consultants to fight against that, to just drill yours deeper. So everyone's going deeper and deeper. And it's tied, like I said earlier, it's tied to the land. It's really your property right to develop that groundwater if you want to. Should go file and get that water right to protect it. But there's not real enforcement if you don't. Okay. Okay, so I feel like I talked about some of this already, but the DNRC permit and change system, let's say there's gonna be a central water system in this area. You have to drill the wells and you have to prove that it's physically and legally available. So that means a lot of science and a lot of law and lots of professionals that have to help you do it. And there's no certain outcome. So even in open basins, it doesn't mean you're gonna get what you need. It takes a lot of capital to get there. And what they want to see is that you have your diversion and operation facilities are already built. So you have to go do that before you even have the water. Also messy water. Yes, you may not get it.
Can I ask a question that you
Yeah.
have already said? What is the difference between the open and closed basin?
In an open basin, so let's take the Flathead Basin. You have more assurance that you can get a water right because it is legally open to new appropriations. Right here, we are closed to new appropriations. So there's a big adverse impact with any water rights if you have to prove you're not going to adversely affect other existing water uses. For private landowners, you have to own the place of use or have some type of legal agreement that lets you try and develop that land. Or say a water and sewer district, if you guys started a district, you would at least have some legal authority or some foundation to allow you to go after things like this. You'd have some leeway there because it would be like almost like a municipal system. And it would be, DNRC would recognize it as a quasi-government body that's, going after central planning. You wouldn't have to have possessory interest in the place of use. So in enclosed basins, which we're in now, you've got to mitigate. I think that's our next segue, right? Let's skip that.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Yep.
The closed basin
So
one.
there's a closed basin map.
Sorry. I think it is.
We're right in here. So everything upstream of Great Falls and, you know, Big Old Madison, Gallatin, all the Three Forks, everything's closed. The Bitterroot's closed. The Upper Clark Fork Basin around Deer Lodge is closed. The Milk River Basin is closed. Rock Creek and the Mussel Shell are closed. So there's also some other things on here like controlled groundwater areas. If say Bureau of Mines and Geology does a groundwater investigation and says there's limited supply. And that becomes well known and everyone's saying we can't even, you know, our showers are going dry, you know, things like that. An area can petition DNRC or their legislature to go after a controlled groundwater area. And what that's gonna do is limit those exempt water rights. So it might do something like you can only get 2 acre feet instead of 10. And those exist in a lot of places. Okay, go ahead. So in closed basins, if we get a new big water right for that big central water system, say a water and sewer district, you've got to go find Farmer Joe who doesn't want to irrigate anymore, and you got to buy his water right. You got to hope that he used it regularly. You have to prove regular use. Just because you have a piece of paper that says you got a water right doesn't mean you really hasn't. You have to use it regularly. Really aerial photos are the best way to prove that. You have to buy it, you have to hold it out here and you say, how much water do we have? If there's 100 acres, there's a volume of water tied to it. That consumptive use of water is all you have to work with to offset your new use. It's tough to find those and it's tough to make them work to offset a well because we're taking usually surface water that runs off quickly downstream. And we're trying to offset year-round use from groundwater. And that location and timing of those two things doesn't always match up. So we might be taking water, the depletion from a well here might reach above 3 points. So, and the water right we bought is over here. That's not gonna work very well. So that's very hard work and you often have to do active mitigation, which means pumping into a pit and letting it infiltrate to offset that timing issue. So you're taking a seasonal water right, because that's what's out there, those irrigation rights, and trying to deal with a year-round depletion. Other places work out well if you've got private, federal, state storage projects that have contract water to sell. That can be a big part of the solution. And a big one here is Canyon Ferry. What I haven't seen is, so I've been involved in buying contracts from Canyon Ferry. There's 300,000 acre feet available. First sale, and it's not that expensive. But what I haven't seen is if they'll sell it to mitigate upstream. They'll mitigate downstream. I don't think they're legally, I'm not sure that they're precluded from selling upstream. I just don't think they've done it. But that might be an option.
But you said
And
it's only
300,000 acre feet.
big.
It could go fast if
That's 35,000.
someone burnt 300,000.
Oh, 300, sorry.
Yeah. It's a fair amount of water. So there are some regional water projects in the state, but what they do is they take small communities, don't have good water systems. They all band together, they form a district, a regional water authority that can go after grant money, federal money. They drill those deep wells and they build the pipeline network. And that works out well in open basins. It hasn't worked out in closed basins. I think Gallatin County and some of the cities and towns in Gallatin Valley are looking into it. It's very early, but they're looking into a regional water system because all these cities and towns all have the same problem. They're all in a closed basin. They're growing faster than they can deal with.
But that could be more than just Gallatin. Right?
Yeah.
It could be like
So-
a regional area.
Right, they're looking into a regional water system that would, I don't know what it would do, but they might, let's say they pump out of Canyon and they build a pipeline from the valley. Well, any city and town along the way, conceivably, that wants to be a part of it, could be a part of it. They might be able to get upstream use, so maybe they are able to pump right at Trident and save all that money in piping. I mean, it's a big project, pipeline here, but they're thinking along those lines because it's gonna take a long time to get there. or probably more than at least a decade, even if they're going hard now. Hey. Yeah.
I can see why whispering these words in a room full of lawyers would start a fight. Is it possible to take water from the river, put it in storage, and use that as a municipal draw, rather than trying to go to a well, or as all the water in the river were to take it?
Answer to your second part of your statement is yes, the water is taken. Legally, it's not available. The answer to the first part is yes, you could conceivably do that. But you've got treatment issues with surface water that you may not have addressed. Got night nutrients and pesticides and other things, but it can be done because that's what some of these other regional water systems like Fort Peck and Fort Hill, they're taking water from, say, Tiber Reservoir, which is surface water, and they're piping it hundreds of miles to these communities that don't have enough water. So yes, you can do it. Takes a lot of money, a lot of treatment of that water, and it still may not taste like great. My example here is a water and sewer district we dealt with in East Helena. Eastgate Water and Sewer needed new supply wells because they were growing, but they're in a closed basin, just like here. They purchased irrigation rights on Prickly Pear Creek. They were able to find them that were used consistently and that someone wanted to sell them. And it was a decent amount of water, and they were senior in priority. That's another issue that I didn't really mention is it can't necessarily be just any water right. It's got to be a good water. Good means regular use and senior priority so that junior users can't make a call for that water. So they purchased that. They went through the whole change process with the NRC, which took, I think, 2 years. The NRC said it's not enough water. So they went and bought BOR Canyon Ferry water. Contract water, it's like $20 an acre foot. And the system is already there because the irrigation company, Hellgate Valley or Helena Valley Irrigation Company Irrigation District can just divert that extra water. Of course, there's money involved, but they can divert that water and then send it to Prickly Pear Creek where there wasn't not enough water from this purchased water, right? So that took a multi-year solution. It all worked out, but in the end, someone objected downstream and it took another year of court battles. But they prevailed. It just took a really long time. So I guess the moral of the story is they were organized into a district already, but it still took multiple years and lots of money. Can be done primarily because you've got this to work with in this location. You've got a lot of water available for sale. It's not that expensive. Okay. So old water rights adjudicated by the water court, they play a role in what you can use now, and they are the reason why the basin is closed. Because really there's more on paper than what's flowing by. DNRC permit change process is really difficult and for good reason, but mitigation is required if you want to get a big water right, bigger than exempt wells. Exempt wells are about all you got to work with on a small scale. Large scale takes more planning, more money, a lot more time. Okay, that's all I got.
Just wondering why a area like Wheatland that might consider organizing into a district can't completely get a system to everybody's. How much do the exempt wells affect the existing water rights?
So anybody can, but in order to create new lots, you are limited to that 10 acre.
If you go back, doing is limiting the density of lots.
It's limiting development. So let's say you've got a quarter section of land. You say, I'm gonna do a subdivision. You can only do, like you said, 30 lots. And that whole subdivision process takes multiple years. And, that's what Jamie works on. There's a whole other list of issues there. It becomes, it's not necessarily economically feasible to do large lots and mean, that's the reason there's a lot of cost that goes into subdivisions and so infrastructure. And then you run into maximum demand issue with low filling exempt 12. And then we've got physical issues, so there may not be physically enough water, even though legally you can go get that exempt 12. And you may not be able to even get to because of physical issues. And Bert's gonna talk about this area not being very well studied. I think that's the conclusion, but we do need more science, we need more information about, I think we're gonna
One more quick question. In the first meeting here, there were a lot of the local people who were fighting issues of junior versus senior right positions. Farmer develops 10 houses, the farmer keeps the senior position, and the houses, one after the other, run out of water because he turned on his irrigation. Is there any way for an existing development to challenge that position, because it's technically going to help them help the homeowner at risk, so that the farmers who didn't want to give up the right and grow more wheat? And that's a difficult balance.
Yeah. If he's got this senior water right, and he appropriately preserved it and whatever deed was going on there, I mean, there's a chance that those people, if I'm tracking, those people may have an interest in that water right if their houses were developed on a previously historic irrigated land.
But they were built
If
on
not-
this land.
If
That's
not,
their point.
and you reserved it from that system,
Yeah.
from that subdivision, they may not have ways to ouch.
So-
Unless they can prove that there's that direct connection. I mean, if you're talking about, well, I'll use one example. There's fish and wildlife rights out there. But the fish didn't file the water rights, they forgot to file their water rights. So you can't use that as a reason unless there's a water. So there's other reasons, we all need water, all the animals need water. But those reasons don't very much weight in water. God, it's really first in time is first in right. So if that farmer has 1870, subdivisions 1980. There's not much you can do.
Does Montana allow for the sale of a home that has such an extent right? Indicating that there's the potential risk if there may not be sufficient water to the home.
There's no, as far as I know, like in title insurance, there's no warranty on water rights. So title companies don't want to touch water rights. They'll help transfer them to someone's name if they buy it, but it takes so much work and investigation to determine due diligence on water rights that they won't warrant you. That's also what makes valuation so difficult. When you go to buy that old water right, it's based on the need. If he needs it more than I do, I'm gonna pay a lot. There's no set value. It's really just,
I have a quick question. So every year in the legislature, there's multiple bills to kill kind of the exempt well thing. And this year, they've tried to outlaw them for at least the last 3 sessions that I've worked. And so there's a possibility that at some point in time, exempt wells are gonna go away. And if that happens, so let's say that does pass at some point, how does that change how that's gonna look? Is that gonna mean that an individual person's not gonna have that ability to go do that? Is that kind of what does that fallout look like?
it probably means that existing, what they would probably
Grandfathering what's there, but I'm saying going forward.
but you couldn't go build a subdivision. You couldn't subdivide any, I mean, subdivision is like, I don't need half of my 5 acres anymore.
Right.
You're not gonna be able to sell that. I mean, it's so tied to property rights that that's why it hasn't gone away. And because we're in closed basins and so much of the state, there's no option, we are growing, we would have to stop growing, period. We'd have to stop having kids. We'd have to stop, yeah.
Well, and that's my question is because I've seen it in other areas where they've tried to put cisterns in.
You can put cisterns in, but you can't pipe it over to a new lot.
Right,
Is
you
that-
have to purchase it.
There's
I know
no, there's no
Boulder
new
County
water use allowed if you don't have. They can reduce it. So on the Flathead Reservation, they have a whole new system, a whole new government basically. Their limit is 2.4 acre feet.
Yeah.
And they won't let you do more than 3 houses, so. But they're in an open basin and they're gonna have their own permit system and even go get a permit, so it is. There's no easy answers for the closed basin issue that we're. That's why everyone keeps using exempt wells and that's why they haven't monkeyed with it. You talk about it, It might go up, might go down, but it hasn't because they can't, no one can figure out what's the best solution.
Right, this year it barely, like 7 votes is what determined that it died this year, because obviously there's strong lobbying on either side of that argument, but I mean, I think looking historically, that's something that's gonna come up depending on,
It will come up every session,
yeah.
and it always has. Any other questions? Okay, Kurt's gonna talk about the science of water, real
Yeah.
water, wet water,
It's gonna-
not paper water.
Not
right?
paper water. Yeah, I've dealt with enough paper water for a while. So unfortunately, I had a great plan that I could use a wireless mouse, except it's out of batteries, so I'm gonna try and drive from here. Yep. So I'm Kurt Zeiler with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. And this is just kind of an introductory slide for those who might not be familiar with our organization. So we're a non-regulatory agency. We are the State Geologic Survey for Montana. And so we study the geologic, energy, mineral, and water resources of the state. And we have a large data component. So we do data preservation. We have a data center. And then all of our data is available to the public, and most of that is available online, and you can go get that yourself. I don't seem to be able to advance though with the. Oh, I thought I had. Somehow I paused it. Okay. Sorry. So this is kind of a roadmap for my talk tonight. And I've already covered the first bullet. I've just got one more slide kind of talking about some of our publicly available data. I'm going to do a little bit of groundwater 101. And then I'm going to talk about some of what we know about groundwater in Southern Broadwater County. And I'll talk some about the groundwater investigation program at the Bureau. And that's what I'm a part of. I can answer as many questions as I can. Well, I've been a hydrogeologist for over 20 years. I just started with the Bureau and the program, so I've only been there for almost 2 months. So I can, I'll have my contact information as well as our program manager's contact information at the end. So one thing that I did want to point out is we have a GIS data hub set of websites that you can go and look at a lot of GIS-based web-based computer mapping of a lot of different topics. So you can get to our surface water and groundwater monitoring sites, our programs, projects that we've worked on in the past and that we're currently working on, as well as a number of other things. So with that, I'm going to jump into groundwater 101. So what is it and where is it? So groundwater is that water that we find underground in geologic formations and units, and it's in the pore spaces of those rocks, and it's in the saturated zone of that. So those are the pore spaces that are completely filled with water. And then an aquifer is any of those geologic units where you can actually access and use that water, that groundwater, using a water well. So has to be able to supply water in a usable quantity. And then we can split aquifers into two major groups. The first is unconfined aquifers. So those are ones that are near the surface and they get water from infiltration of precipitation or surface water to the underground. And so where that becomes saturated in an unconfined aquifer, that's the water table. When you hear people talk about the water table, that's that interface below which all the pore space in the geologic material is saturated. And then one of the things is that unconfined aquifers are usually connected to surface water. A lot of times groundwater is discharging to surface water, but like I mentioned, sometimes surface water provides recharge to the underlying groundwater. And then the other thing the next one is the confined aquifers. So those are ones that are deeper and they have some sort of geologic unit above them that is relatively impermeable and doesn't let groundwater flow very easily. So like silts, clays, shales, things like that. And so these get their water from further up where they are unconfined. And once they fall under the confining unit, that's where you start getting pressure. And if you sink a well, like I accidentally brought in here, that's where you start to get this confining pressure, and that makes water levels in the aquifer rise to above the top of the aquifer itself and even above the land surface, and that's what we call artesian pressure. So this in this example, the water level in the confined unit is up above the land surface, and what you get with that is a flowing well. And that's not terribly common, but if you can find it, that's nice. And then so groundwater is found, like I said, in the pore spaces of the rock or geologic material. So a lot of time that's a granular porous media like sand and gravel or sandstone, something like that. And then we do also have fractured porous media. So that's like a granite with cracks and fractures in it. And then also in limestone, you can have caverns. So, and here in the southern part of Broadwater County, we have the Madison Group limestone, and that's what the Lewis and Clark caverns are in. So that can actually have a lot of groundwater in it where that's saturated in those caverns. And so I kind of mentioned permeability before, and that's the ability of a geologic material to transmit groundwater. And so it's not just the size of the pore spaces, but it's really about how well those are connected. So like in a granite, like I'm showing in the middle here, if you have two separate fractures like this, you can sink a well and get some water out of that. But if you have a number of connected fractures, that's where you're really going to get a higher yield. And same thing with the limestone. You know, if you actually don't end up intersecting any of those large voids, caverns with water, you're not going to get any water. You have to intersect one of those. And then I wanted to talk really quickly about what happens when you do pump a well. So groundwater flows into the well, but the water level in the well goes down, and it also goes down in the surrounding aquifer. And so if you think about this in kind of 3D, we call that the cone of depression. So it's kind of a circular cone around the area of the well where the aquifer water level is drawn down. And then another term we use is area of influence. And that's kind of the width of the cone of depression. And one thing that I'll mention too is that, you know, not all aquifers are as permeable in the same directions, or they're just not a homogeneous unit. So it's not always a cone. There'll be some different shapes that you might get to how that drawdown looks. Yeah. Boy, an exempt well would not draw down by 300 feet. Yeah, I mean, and even a municipal well wouldn't be drawn down that much, but I'm going to actually show some examples from a project that the GWIP program did as kind of one of its first projects. So that's a good question, but that can be pretty far when you're talking about multiple wells over a large area, which you gave me the perfect segue to what happens when you pump more than one well. So if they're within each other's area of influence, then you get the two cones of depression interfering with each other. And so you end up having those cones of depression go further out on the side, and there's greater drawdown in between those wells. So I'm going to jump into southern Broadwater County here. And there's really very few studies specific to this area regarding groundwater, whether it's availability and quantity or quality. But we do have some monitoring wells that we measure water levels in regularly that the Bureau does. And we've done a fair amount of geologic mapping in the area. And then, of course, all the drillers' logs go into the Bureau to go into our groundwater information center database. So there's kind of four main types of units. And just to orient everybody, here we are in southern Broadwater County, Gallatin County across Jefferson River, and then Jefferson County to the west. I'm going to bring in a bunch of the geologic mapping that we've done. So there's a lot of, hopefully those colors showed up relatively brightly. But the most recent and one of the most prolific of the aquifer systems that we'd have is recent sedimentary deposits. And that's sand and gravel along the Jefferson River and some of the smaller streams. There's some, and they're in yellow here. There are some somewhat older deposits that are kind of in the uplands as well over here. But so where those are thick and where it's sand and gravel, you can get some really high yields. And the highest yield I saw in this area from kind of looking through our GWIC database, driller reported having a well that was capable of doing 900 gallons a minute. So that's,
Which kind? It's the more high yield.
yeah, sand and gravel,
It's
pretty
but
thick.
which color?
It's in the yellows. Yep. And then next, we have older sedimentary deposits and rocks that are in kind of the pink rosish color, and it's a pretty broad area. So, they're older, meaning tens of millions of years old. And unfortunately, that's a lot of silts and clays, siltstone, claystone. There are some sands and gravels and sandstones, but not very many. So you can get some yields above 50 gallons a minute, but really what you should be expecting is to be in the 10 to 15 gallon a minute range for kind of a normal size well. To get those higher yields, you have to find those sands and gravels, and you're putting in a larger diameter well, and it's going to be hundreds of feet deep, if not over 1,000 feet deep. So not a cheap endeavor. And then in kind of some of these brighter reds and this orange here, we have volcanics and granite. And seems like there's really not much fracturing in these based on looking at the well logs I'm able to find in our GWIC database. So they're pretty minimal yield. They're not really an aquifer in this area. And then last, we've got very old sedimentary rocks. And so we're talking hundreds of millions of years old. And most of those are not going to be great producing units, but this is where we find the Madison Group limestone. So if you hit one of those cavern type systems, you can make a lot of water, and you can make 250 gallons a minute plus probably. So, and those are all going to generally be deeper, or at least where they are exposed at the surface, the water table is going to be deeper. I'm going to show that a little bit here. We're going to look vertically at a cross section. So we're lucky that one of our geologists at the Bureau drew a vertical cross section of the geology right through southern Broadwater County. And so this cross section goes from in Jefferson County and across into Gallatin County. But if we take a look at that, and I've kind of colored everything in with the same colors. So these lighter blue colors, that's the group of rocks that includes the Madison limestone. So you can see this is really complicated. There's a lot of folding and faulting at depth. So that overprint of all of that, we call it structural geology, makes that really complex problem to find something like the Madison limestone. So you can see over here on the east, that's where we have the relatively young, like sand and gravel that's associated with rivers. So that's not very thick, but then you can see how thick in kind of the rose color, the somewhat older sedimentary units are. So they can be well over 1,000 feet deep, and they're not really that great. And they're over that very old, like what would contain the Madison limestone in a lot of these areas. And so there are areas where the Madison is close to the surface, but like I was saying, where the water table is in that and how well connected not only those caverns might be, but how the folding and faulting might have interacted with that. That's makes things just that much more complicated. And then we do have a big body of granite here. This is probably still over in Jefferson County or is kind of close to the border. So there's just a big unit of granite that's not going to be a producer. And same thing for folks in Jefferson County over further to the west where that orange was. There's a big, thick volcanic deposit there that's going to be not much. So I want to talk about wells and water use in Broadwater County, and this is over the entire county. So this is what I was able to pull from our GWIC database. And these are all of the pumping wells that are in Broadwater County over time that have been installed since 1950. So starting in 1950, there were only about 250 wells, now right around 3,700 wells. And then here in orange, I'm going to bring in, these are just domestic wells. So you can see that the vast majority of the wells overall in Broadwater County are single individual domestic wells. And there's a few things that you can see that aren't terribly surprising in here, but you can see, early to mid 2000s, having an inflection for the housing bubble. And then in 2008, we have an inflection the other way with the economic downturn. And then more recently, we've been returning to home building. So, it's a fair number of domestic wells. But if we look at overall water use, got the individual domestic down in the corner here in the same color, it's really only about 13% of the use in Broadwater County. And so these are all data from 2015. The US Geological Survey every 5 years puts together really comprehensive water use across the US. And, it's across the entire US and it's really sliced and diced. So it takes them about 3 years each time to do this. So they're almost done at this point with the 2020 data, but it's still just not quite ready. So that's why this is 2015. So it'll be interesting to see how much of this might have changed. But so that's municipal supply. So that's like Townsend, and I assume Townsend is probably on wells, and I should know that. I grew up in Helena, so I should know that, but I just had assumed that. And so yeah, so some of that supply is going to residential. Some probably also goes to industrial and other uses. Yeah. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would,
I don't think so.
I wouldn't, I would guess not, but
There's information behind this pie chart that might be important to understand that, because, from my experience, I don't think Townsend's water use is gonna outpace the irrigation use in Broadwater County. With
Yeah.
cost and irrigation district. I'm guessing that USGS is taking an average of the population and saying, there's more information behind it, I guess. It's the main point.
I see that as fairly important because what that tells me is that if Cleveland area were to become a public supply point, 98% of the graph gets plugged in by 2 dimensions. So that graph can't be representing a percentage of 100%.
well, and so this is also just groundwater use. So this doesn't all include surface water use either. That's the other.
There's not much irrigation. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's probably the irrigation
Yeah,
from surface water outstrips that. So, irrigation is of the groundwater being used, irrigation is about 30%, but probably in terms of overall, and I was just pulling the groundwater statistics, but that USGS and if you want to look it up, it's USGS Circular 1441, and they have all the data as a spreadsheet that you can download as well. if you Google that, you'll be able to get it. And so they are compiling that, all of that for surface water as well. And then the last two uses on here is industrial self-supplied. So these are industries that have their own wells, and then stock watering, and those are each about 5% of groundwater use in the county. And then I'm going to show some data from, there are two Bureau wells that we monitor regularly in southern Broadwater County. You'll see one triangle only, but that's because they're on basically the same parcel, but one is deeper than the other. And then we've got three other monitoring wells just across the county line over in Jefferson County. And so they're kind of they're in the same geologic units that we see. So I find it interesting to look at those as well. And just to give you an idea, these are all of the wells that are in our GWIC database in this area. So you can see there's quite a number of wells that have been installed in southern Broadwater County, Gallatin County. So just to give an idea of that. So I'm going to start with those wells over that are in southern Broadwater County. And this first one is actually a well that is in the Madison Group limestone. So I've got two graphs on here. This upper one is precipitation, but it's the departure from average. So where you see the kind of the greenish blue above, that's wetter than normal, and where it's red below the zero line, that's where it's drier than average. And so in this well, what we see, and we've been monitoring this well since 1994, we see is there's really not any kind of long-term trend in the water level. We started at about 127 feet below ground, and we ended with at about 127 feet below ground. So this is most likely a confined portion of the Madison. There's no real signal from precipitation. But what you do see is still there is an annual cycle to this. And so you can see there's kind of 5 peaks and valleys in each of the 5-year time chunks. There's something kind of funky that happened where there was a big water level rise in 1996. Not sure what that's about, but kind of the takeaway is that there's no, in this well at least, there's no long-term trend. And we did take a sample in this well for water quality back in 2009, and it's really pretty nice water, usable for pretty much any conceivable purpose.
Is that off the Price Road, that test well?
I think it is actually, yeah. Now that you say that, I'm pretty sure that's what I remember from looking at the log, so.
That's that they're tapping into. This is having to be confined space where it's staying very average because not a lot of people tapping it.
That's probably part of it, and then part of it is that the Madison limestone is so permeable that it's easily able to supply water to wells. And there's sorry, say that again.
And then are we-
Because they're not drilling that deep, and you're really lucky to find you're either really good or you're really lucky to be able to drill into the Madison. It's not everywhere, and with all of the folding and faulting, it's not only hard to find, but I'm sure there's gonna be some areas where there's just gonna be, it's gonna be blocked off by faults. Faults can either enhance groundwater flow or inhibit it, and it's kind of, you have to pump a well enough that's in one of those fault blocks to see how it ends up behaving, to be honest.
How many test wells do you think the area needs to get a more predictive map, like burning with well use?
More than is feasible to fund, probably. That's a hard question to answer without doing more of a desktop study, but it's gonna be a fair amount, to be honest. Yeah.
Upstream of it, what is the as aquifer being recharged? That's the Yellowstone Park.
Probably not necessarily. So there's a number of outcrops, and I didn't really point them out. Let me see if I can go back here real quick, and they're gonna be fairly difficult to see, and especially if I'm kind of around the corner here, but there's some right here, right here. It's kind of this, yeah, or almost purplish gray, or at least it was on my monitor, and I'm not sure. Looks like it's kind of showing up like that, but and how all of that's interacting with the folding and faulting, that's going to be really hard to say without doing some pretty intensive work. Yes. Yes.
So what I'm gleaning from what you're saying, Karen, and what you, that graph you showed, told me is that there is not a consistent, we don't have consistency of water availability across this because of the way that the tectonic landscape is set. It's a crapshoot what you're gonna get when you drill.
Kinda, yeah.
All right, glad I understood that.
Yeah.
It's a- Yeah, just, you know, wanna make sure I understand. what
Yeah,
I'm seeing.
yeah, there's gonna be a lot of uncertainty in a lot of places, although, I mean, some of that is, well, how do you want to try and go? But even with that, that's,
Or the urban.
yeah, I mean,
Got it.
we're talking thousands of feet, not quite to the core of the earth, but getting there if you want to. So the other well that's right there is in kind of that shallower, kind of tens of millions of year old type of unit. And so it's in, looking at the log, this one is in siltstone and claystone. And one thing that we do see is a little more of a signal from precipitation. I would say you see this water level decline of 4 or so feet that happened during the 2000s, and you can see that there was a relatively dry period in the precipitation preceding that. So that's likely a part of the cause of that. And then you see it kind of recover when there's a little more of a wetter period, and then you see a little more of a dry period in the early 2020s, and you get a little water level decline. So this is pretty much following what the precipitation trend is, I would say. And we did also sample this well in 2009, and total dissolved solids of around 1,000 milligrams per liter, which is not that great. And then unfortunately 500 milligrams per liter of that is sulfate, which is going to make it relatively unpalatable. And for lack of a better way to put it, it may keep you more than regular. So that would not necessarily be my first choice for a water supply. So take a quick look at some of these wells that are just over in Jefferson County. These are all also in that tens of millions of year old siltstones, claystones type unit. And we see a water level increase around 2018. There's a little bit of one wet, and these are all quarters, so they're 3 months periods for the precipitation departures from normal. I wouldn't expect something like that to necessarily drive a water level increase like that. So that's kind of interesting. But what's even more interesting is if we look at this next well, it's in the same unit, but this is almost 1,200 feet deep. And what we see is at the same time as that, rather than about 4 feet of increase, it's about 20 feet. So I am not sure what is driving that, but certainly, I don't, that wouldn't happen on that type of time scale. So yeah, yeah. So what's driving that is a bit of a mystery. So we have this data that tells us that these water levels did this, but I certainly do not have an explanation for that. But I would say that, my gut tells me that whatever is driving this 20-foot increase at depth is what is causing that increase at only around 460 or so feet. And oh, and I should mention, we started monitoring these wells in around 2014. And then this last one, we only started monitoring it in 2020. So kind of see that last little decline in this as well. But we need more data. We need more time to get more data from this well to say anything else about it, really. And we haven't sampled any of these wells for water quality either. And so I'm going to wrap up talking about the groundwater investigation program. And so it's designed to address specific groundwater questions across Montana. And so the program started in 2009, started by the legislature, the interim water policy committee before that had identified lack of groundwater information and lack of information about groundwater and surface water interaction as kind of two key issues that we just didn't have as much data about across Montana, but we were seeing specific problems cropping up. So the program's really kind of designed to address local types of issues. And so kind of the products that we produce, there's always an interpretive report that describes the hydrogeology of the area and the purpose of the report. And then if there's groundwater modeling done, which there commonly is, there's a report to go along with that groundwater modeling. And so this is kind of my area of specialty. So these are digital representations of the groundwater flow system, different aquifer units, different confining units, if those are part of the overall hydrogeology. And so they're basically a tool that we can use to develop predictive scenarios that we can simulate with the model to see what happens, to look at different things like, what if we have more pumping or less recharge due to some sort of land use change, or what happens in a drought, those kinds of things. And then there's always our set of hydrogeologic data that we collected. And so that's housed in our groundwater information center database and available to the public. And that's always included in our reports as well. So our project areas, we've worked in a number of different areas. So this is one of the maps that you can get off of the Data Hub site if you go to our website. And so you can look at this map and you can click on each one and get more information, and you can see where we've completed projects, where we're currently working, what we've got in review. And then there's kind of a number of just overarching themes that we've had in these projects. A lot of it is land use change, and that for both water availability and quality. And then, as I was saying, surface water, groundwater interactions, and things like that. So what I'm going to talk about is, as an example, is a project that we did north of Helena in the Scratch Gravel Hills. And so it's kind of off to the northwest of Helena, and it's an area that we're seeing a fair amount of subdivision, and actually DNRC put in a temporary groundwater or controlled groundwater area, kind of as things were heating up in this area. So it's kind of interesting geologically, kind of off to the southeastern corner. You're still kind of in sand and gravel type of alluvium that's pretty permeable and supplies a lot of water. And then as you go into the Scratch Gravel Hills themselves, this area, you're in bedrock, and it's a lot of it is it's not quite granitic, but it's an igneous rock like granite, and it does have some fractures in it, but of course it's not as much of an aquifer as that sand and gravel. So concerns about sustainability of groundwater supplies, especially with increasing subdivisions and residential use. And then a little bit of the project was also looking at the potential for septic effluent and potential impacts on water quality. So this is where we're going to start looking at cones of depression. So we did build a groundwater model for this project, and we had a hypothetical subdivision that's kind of in the brownish red rectangle. And so we were looking at kind of two different aspects. We were looking at both lot size over the same area, and then also whether or not there was a public water supply well that supplied the subdivision, or if everybody was on their own individual wells. And so what we have in each of the purple contours is the kind of the area of influence of the cone of depression around the wells, and defining that as the 1 foot drawdown. So it's not quite the maximum extent, but it's maximum, or it's the extent of really an appreciable drawdown. So if we have the 10-acre lots and just a public water supply well, and so it's located in the southeast corner because that's in the sand and gravel. You see that that's got about a half mile, a little under half mile area of influence. But if you've subdivided that area into 33 approximately 10-acre parcels, then that area of influence, if each of those parcels has its own well, increases to almost 9/10 of a mile. And that's because you're not concentrating that drawdown in a high permeability unit. You're spreading that out amongst some of the sand and gravel, but also some into the bedrock. And then also, if you make smaller lots and the demand is higher overall, and it's a little hard to explain, but as we were talking about, a lot of that use for residential is for outdoor irrigation. Everybody wants their Kentucky bluegrass. So, you know, on a 10-acre parcel, well, I don't think anybody wants to have a 10-acre lawn, but everybody on a 1-acre parcel is going to have their lawn. So we have a higher overall demand from that. And so, you know, even if you have a public water supply well, you end up having that area of influence go out to 1.33 miles. And then if everybody has their own individual well, that area of influence increases to 2 miles. So that'll kind of matters. So kind of the takeaways from this groundwater model was that the public water supply would be more desirable than individual wells. But the caveat there is you have to have an aquifer that's able to supply that single well that can then deliver on all of that demand. And then, you know, we have 3 times the drawdown on the smaller lots than we do the 10-acre lots. So this did end up, you know, or at least our study contributed to Lewis and Clark County deciding to, in this area, put in zoning that required no more than, or no less than 10-acre lots, I should say. But something else that they could have done here is say we want to do groundwater monitoring in terms of both water levels and use, if you're going to have smaller lot sizes. And then one of the things too is, you know, kind of have to go through a process of defining what is acceptable drawdown. And so that's, you know, for other folks like you to decide. And then for the project nominating process. So we do not come up with these projects on our own. These are all projects that are proposed by folks like you. Come get them from counties, from conservation districts. We've even gotten them from private entities. And so what we ask for are a project proposal description, and we want it to be pretty succinct. So we ask for 3 pages or less of text. You can have additional tables, graphs, figures, things like that. and kind of go through the project purpose, the study area, all of those basics. And then we don't even prioritize the projects. There's kind of a scoring matrix, and all of this project prioritization is done by the Groundwater Steering Committee. And so that was part of the legislation that created the program in the first place. So there are 4 voting members for it. It's DNRC, DEQ, Department of Ag, and the state library. And then there's a number of ex officio members who get involved in the discussion, and the Bureau is, of course, one of those. And then the governor has 4 appointees from agricultural interests, industrial water users, conservation and ecological interests, and the development community. And they're also basically ex officio non-voting members. But they get together and discuss the projects together, but it's really only the 4 voting members who work on doing that actual prioritization. And so you can go to our website and look at what the project nomination looks like. And I actually have a number of handouts. I've kind of got a 1-pager on the program, a fold-out 4-pager on the program, and then have the Bureau's kind of biennial report that we give to legislators and other folks like that. So, and then I've got another handout that is kind of on the nominating process. But really quickly, we haven't set the exact schedule for 2024. And I should mention, we do the call for nominations every 3 years. Last one was 2021, so next year is when all of this happens. And so we don't expect things to change very much from 2021. So we're expecting that in March is when we're going to put out the call for nominations, and then they'll be due in June. And it'll be in October when the Groundwater Steering Committee gets together for their discussions. And then November is when they finalize the rankings, and it sounds like that process usually takes about a month. And then once those rankings are finalized, the one place where the Bureau puts in a little more input is looking at each of the projects and figuring out what's the time and resources needed to complete each one. And so it's definitely going to be 2 projects that end up going forward out of the prioritization project or process, maybe 3. I guess we tried 4 a couple of cycles ago, and that was just too much to bite off. But certainly projects can be renominated and go through that. So that's kind of how all of that works. So, and we do kind of stagger these as well. So there's a little bit of a leeway, and some projects, we really only expect to take a year, but there's some that we expect to take kind of that 3-year cycle. And I think there was one that it was even like, well, we kind of expect this to take 4 years to do all the data collection that we need to do. So there's kind of some leeway there and how all of that works. So it's not just a set cycle of 3 years for getting everything done, but all of the nominations are done on a 3-year basis. And so with that, we'll take any other questions, but there's my contact info. And then if you have more in-depth questions on some of the mechanics of the program, Jeanette Abdo is the program manager, and there's her contact info. Yeah.
Can you tell us where the most likely location for a public water pump and a public sewer system is being located under your recommendations? Or is that a project level question?
That's a project level question, yeah. And we really probably wouldn't get into the wastewater part of it. That's not.
Is that project something